What's up, Thrashers, and welcome back once again to the Thrash Maniac 99 YouTube channel, and I am back with yet another discography ranking for you guys. It's been a month since we've done a discography ranking on here, and well, after we did the Asphyx ranking, I put up a poll for you guys to vote on in the community tab of the YouTube page, and the theme of it was modern metal bands, so you had the option of Avenged Sevenfold, Ghost, Lamb of God, Trivium, and the band that eventually won the poll. And the band that won the poll, I'm wearing the shirt for a reason, and that is, of course, Mastodon. I am excited to do this discography ranking because I have been a longtime fan of Mastodon, probably since I was about 14, 15 years old. It was 2009, and it was Crack the Sky when it came out, and I became obsessed with Mastodon from that moment on. Like, Crack the Sky changed my perspective on a lot of metal. It opened my eyes to the progressive metal genre a little bit more, and I've been caught up with the band really ever since. I went back to their old stuff after checking out Crack the Sky, and I've been caught up with the band pretty much ever since. And Braun Daler, the drummer, he's a drum hero of mine. As you can tell, I got a drum kit. I'm not a very good drummer at all, but I wouldn't say I'm like completely void of talent, but I just gotta get like some things worked out. But Braun Daler, one of my favorite drummers of all time. Bill Kelleher, one of the best modern riff writers in metal today. I mean, there's just so much about Mastodon to love. What's there not to love about Mastodon? But with that being said, let's get into the early history of this band. So, Mastodon was formed after January 2000 when two native Georgians, Brent Hines and Troy Sanders, met two New Yorkers who moved to Georgia, Braun Daler and Bill Kelleher, at a High on Fire show, and they became fast best friends right off the bat, talking about their mutual love for the sludge metal scene, bands like Crowbar, Melvins, Neurosis, among many others, as well as their love of Iron Maiden and Thin Lizzy. So, pretty much from that show on, they became best friends, and they didn't realize how much stuff they really liked that they had in common. Now, prior to this night, Braun and Bill were both in two different bands together. They were in Lethargy, which was more of like a technical death metal band with some hardcore in there. And then the band Today is the Day, which is this like extreme, strange, avant-garde metal band, which is very weird and not necessarily my cup of tea. But Lethargy, or Lethargy, whatever you want to call it, yeah, definitely more of that raw, gritty, technical, hardcore-inspired death metal. So right off the bat, Braun and Bill both kind of had a bit of a technical death metal pedigree and a bit of a hardcore pedigree coming in whenever the band was formed. But after they met at this High on Fire show, Braun, Bill, Troy, and Brent formed Mastodon. Now, it is important to note that originally they did have a lead vocalist named Eric Sainer, who unfortunately had personal differences with the rest of the band and opted to leave in 2000. Leaving us with the classic quartet of Braun, Bill, Troy, and Brent. So, yeah, and that's the lineup that's remained to this very day. Now, sometime in 2001, they recorded some stuff that would eventually be re-released in 2006 called Call of the Mastodon, which was more of a demo, but this demo was circulating around in the underground scene, which led to Mastodon being picked up by Relapse Records, who I just recently talked about in the 10 great metal record labels past and present video. If you want to know more, go check out that video. But Relapse would pick up Mastodon, and Mastodon was super excited and would eventually go to the studio. And starting here through Blood Mountain, they would be working with the same producer. They'd be working with one, Matt Bayless, who would become a really good friend of the band over the years due to their experiences recording together. And in 2002, we would get the debut album, Remission. Now, Remission comes out on Relapse Records, produced by Matt Bayless, and this would begin a bit of a theme for Mastodon, where the first four albums are based on the four basic elements of the earth, like fire, water, earth, and air. So you might be thinking, Could they be writing music for Avatar: The Last Airbender? I mean, maybe. Not really. But yeah, this first album, Remission, would be based with a theme about fire, even though it's not a concept album. It's just a bit of a theme they use throughout the album. Overall, this is my number 6 album. I think this is a damn strong debut. It's definitely heavier, more gritty, and more aggressive than the majority of the Mastodon discography. This is where they really kind of started off more of a straight-up sludge metal band with some progressive metal tendencies, and there are even a couple of moments of thrash on this album where they can get into some fast, sped-up stuff, but man, the guitars are absolutely crunchy on this album, with songs like the opening Crusher Destroyer, March of the Fire Ants, which is like the big standout track for me at least. But other interesting song titles like Mother Puncher. But there's some other great songs like Trilobites, Trampled Under Hoof, Trainwreck. The finale, Elephant Man, is like this like dark atmospheric track. Like definitely this first album definitely showcasing a lot of potential for this band going forward, and really this album made such a big buzz in the underground that's like everybody started to pay attention to them, like, oh shit, what's this band doing in Atlanta, Georgia, making some of the heaviest stuff at the time? And boy, it worked, because this was a hell of a debut, and Relapse was super proud of them, and, well, off to the races we go. Now, Mastodon would eventually go on to tour for Remission for the next year or two, before returning to the studio once again in sometime in 2003. Once again working with Matt Bayless as the producer, and this one, for this next album, they would now move on to themes about water, but now we get into the first concept album, and eventually released in 2004 on Relapse Records, we would get an absolutely legendary album for modern metal, Leviathan. Of course, this is a concept album loosely based on Herman Melville's novel Moby Dick. After all, the album cover definitely tells you that. But yeah, Leviathan, massive album for the time. This was definitely where their progressive lenience would start to show more in their songwriting. It's definitely still sludgy, but there's a little bit more in the way of prog going on this album. Overall, this is my number 2 album. I love this album. It was close between this and my number 1. It was very close, but Leviathan, what more can I say about this album that nobody else has said already, other than, again, the guitar crunch is maintained. If anything, it might have gotten a little bit heavier, but at the same token, there's a little more focus on melody on this album, not only in the guitars, but also in the vocals. You get, like, Remission was mostly gruff vocals. Here, with Leviathan, you get a little bit more in the way of clean vocals, particularly from Troy and Brent. Like, Brent started to show his vocal ability on here, but it was mostly Troy doing some of the cleans, but Troy doing all the gruffs on here. But, of course, Blood and Thunder, one of the best opening songs in recent memory. I mean, one of the best riffs in recent memory. That song just kicks ass all the way through, but you also get other great ones like Iron Tusk with some amazing drum work, Sea Beast being a particular favorite of mine off of this album, Aqua Dementia is fantastic, but then you get to their first prog epic with Hearts Alive of nearly 14 minutes of just atmosphere, aggression, brutality, melody. It's just everything all-encompassing Mastodon was on this track, and this song would really kind of signal where Mastodon would be going forward from here on out in terms of experimentation. Of course, storytelling is important, but yeah, just top to bottom, brilliant album. Nothing more, nothing less can be said. One of the best. Now, of course, Mastodon would tour pretty heavily on Leviathan. In fact, if I remember right, they did do a tour at one point with bands like Slipknot and Killswitch Engage, and among so many others, which would probably be an expensive tour nowadays, to pull off, because look at all those bands. They're huge now, so... Yeah, interesting time for Mastodon, and then eventually they would get to do the Unholy Alliance tour opening for Slayer, which, if you know anything about Slayer's past, if you open for Slayer, you're kind of fucked. But the fans of Slayer took Mastodon in with open arms on that tour, and fucking great time for the band. But after the success of Leviathan and the touring, the band would go back to the studio in late 2005, early 2006, once again with Matt Bayles on production duties, and this would actually be the last album produced by Matt Bayles. And also, very important to note, that after the success of Leviathan, they got a major label deal with Reprise Records. However, they were still attached to Relapse for this album, so they were on both labels at the same time. So they were on Relapse and a major label with Reprise. And eventually released in 2006, we get Blood Mountain. Now, Blood Mountain, again, continuing the theme about the elements of the earth, and this one would be themed around the element of earth. And it's also another concept album based about a story of a man climbing up a mountain, getting lost, strange things happening like hallucinations, finding weird creatures. It's a strange story, but it definitely paints a really cool picture. This is my number 3 album. It's almost as good as Leviathan, although definitely a big difference in terms of production. Like, the production, I think, got a little bit, there's a little bit more heft in the production this time, and also what I was talking about with Leviathan having a little more focus on melody, the melodies were pushed even further on Blood Mountain. There's a little bit less of the gruff vocals going on, and definitely much more emphasis on the clean vocals. Like, Brent and Troy's cleans really started to shine. Even Bron Daylord, he got to do some cleans on the song Colony of Birchman, which is one of the best Mastodon songs of all time. And hell, I remember first time checking out this song was on Rock Band 2, and I remembered I played it on the guitar on hard difficulty, missed one note, almost got 100% on hard difficulty on the guitar of this song, because it's such a banger of a tune. But other great tracks like the opening, The Wolf is Loose, is fantastic. Capillary and Crest, Sleeping Giant, which that song, I think, represented a turning point for Mastodon for the remainder of their career, because it's like the precursor to the next album almost, and it sounded like it could have been on the next album. But other songs like Blade Catcher, Siberian Divide, This Mortal Coil, there's Crystal Skull with that awesome drum intro, that tribal intro, just so many cool things. Now, the only complaint on this album is the last track, Pendulous Skin. It's... I mean, like, there's 4 or 5 minutes of it in the beginning, which is like this cool instrumental ditty with like atmospheric wailing vocals. But it's a 22-minute song, and the remainder of it until the final minute is just nothing. It's silence. And it's, sometimes that drives me up a wall. It's like, oh my god, just make it only just the instrumental and the thing at the end, for fuck's sake. But I digress on that. And I also forgot to mention, too, that starting with, I believe, Remission, I could be wrong, let me double check my notes here. No, actually, it would begin with Leviathan, where Mastodon would start a pretty close relationship with one of their heroes, Scott Kelly from Neurosis, as he would do a guest vocal spot on every album up to the last one. But, yeah, he would come in and do some stuff. And also another big guest, Josh Homme from Caius and Queens of the Stone Age and Eagles of Death Metal would come in to do guest stuff on Colony of Birchman, as well as doing that last-minute, like, weird letter reading of some sort, which is weird, I don't get it, but Yeah, Pendulous Skin, if it was just left at the instrumental, I think it would have been fine. It did not need to have 16 extra minutes of absolute silence. But yeah. But Blood Mountain, fantastic album. Definitely check it out if you haven't. And we'll move on. So Mastodon, once again, toured their asses off on this album, including another Unholy Alliance tour. This time, instead of just them, well, the first one they did, they also had Children of Bodom with them. I completely forgot to mention that. But this Unholy Alliance tour, which was in 2008, they also toured not only with Slayer, but also with Amon Amarth and Trivium, which, imagine doing that tour nowadays if Slayer would come back. But I digress. However, the band would return to the studio in 2008, and this time they would pick up a new producer, and boy, they would pick up a really big one. They would work with none other than Brendan O'Brien, who has worked with a lot of different bands and artists, most notably Pearl Jam, Korn, Killswitch Engage, and AC/DC. So definitely a good choice in terms of who they could go for a producer in terms of someone bigger. And finally released in early 2009, we get to Crack the Sky. This is my clear-cut number one. Well, I guess I shouldn't say clear-cut, because it was close between this and Leviathan, but I just have always been attached to this album ever since I discovered it when it came out, and I just love this album. This is one of my favorite progressive metal albums, period, and this definitely signaled a big shift. Gone is pretty much most of the sludge metal, and it's definitely more of a progressive metal album. Not really a sludge prog album. This is straight up prog metal with a lot of Black Sabbath influence and King Crimson influence, so it's like a hybrid almost of the two bands, because you get some Sabbath-inspired riffs, but with some of the intricacies of King Crimson. And man, 7 songs, so this is the album with the fewest songs, but definitely longer tracks like The Czar and The Last Baron being 10, or actually 11 minutes and 13 minutes respectively, but even the shorter songs are fantastic. Oblivion, that was the first Mastodon song I ever heard, still might be my favorite Mastodon song, and also this would be the beginning of pretty much, for the most part, clean vocals all the way through the rest of their career. Very little gruff vocals on here. And Bron Daylor getting to shine on vocals as he does a good chunk of the lead vocals on Oblivion. Actually, all three of them, Bron, Bill, and Brent, showcasing great vocals on this album. Especially Brent. Like, Brent gets a lot of flack, but I like his vocals because it kind of sounds like a country singer meets Ozzy Osbourne in the vocals, but you can definitely tell everybody has their own take with their vocal style and vocal talents. And all three, Bron, Troy, and Brent, if I said Bill, I apologize, but all three just absolutely kill it on here. But other great songs like Divinations was great. Ghost of Corellia is a very underrated song. Quintessence is awesome. The title track, which brings back Scott Kelly from Neurosis on guest vocals, and this is the only song with the gruff vocals, and they're done by Scott. So yeah, aside from Scott, everybody's going clean vocals on here. The musicianship was absolutely perfect on here. The production, Brendan and Brian did a great job, and this is a legendary all-time album for me. I think this, for me, is the best Mastodon album because it basically is like the perfect amalgamation of who they were and what they would become. Brilliant album. I can gush about it all day, and yeah. But also some other things I forgot to mention about the album is that this would be the last album with the elemental influence, as this would be themed around air and ether, with concepts about astral traveling, outer space, and ethereal atmospheres. But it also would serve as a tribute to Bron Daylor's sister, Sky Daylor, who unfortunately committed suicide when she was 14 years old, and her name being in the title with an E at the end. Very, very beautiful tribute from a family member to another. So, but yeah, Crack the Sky. Mwah. Perfect. Now, of course, Mastodon would tour heavily for the next year or two on this album, but they would get back to the studio kind of fast. They would return in early 2011, and we are about to enter a somewhat dramatic shift in the band's sound. New producer change, and once again still on Reprise Records, and for the producer they would pick up a gentleman named Mike Elizondo. I said that very convincingly. Mike Elizondo, who is a more of an eclectic producer. He's done, his discography of production is very weird. Everything from Eminem to Natasha Bedingfield to Snoop Dogg to Avenged Sevenfold. But largely I think Mastodon picked him because of his success with the prior Avenged Sevenfold album the year before, Nightmare. And they decided they wanted to go big or go home with their sound. And released in 2011, we would get The Hunter. Now, The Hunter, like I said, this was a somewhat seismic shift in the sound, because you definitely get a little bit more of like a radio commercial side to their sound, as you got much shorter songs on here. And there's also, 13 tracks on here, so they got more compacted into this album. And this is my number 7 album, and I like this album. I know this album gets a little bit of flack from a lot of fans, and I can kind of understand it. It's like you go from an absolute genre-defining album with Crack the Sky, and then you move into this more kind of like radio-friendly commercial side of their sound. But there's still plenty of balls on this album. Songs like Black Tongue, the opener, is very heavy. Curl of the Burl kind of balances the heaviness and the more radio-friendly side. And you also get other like underrated tracks like Stargasm, Dry Bone Valley, Creature Lives is a very interesting song. But for me, the standouts are the 2 long tracks. The Sparrow being the final track, which is this like atmospheric, ethereal, dark, melodic song. But then the real standout for me is the title track, The Hunter, as the song was written after, as kind of a tribute to Brent Hines' brother, who unfortunately passed away in a hunting accident while they were recording this album. But the song, The Hunter, kind of feels like a bit of a continuation of Crack the Sky. Like, it has the same kind of feel to it, same kind of atmosphere attached. Honestly, the song The Hunter could have been on Crack the Sky, that as well as like Sleeping Giant, and it would have been kind of like a greatest hits Mastodon album, but I digress. The Hunter, yeah, definitely kind of split the fans a little bit because it was a little less heavy than their prior albums. There's still plenty of heaviness on it. It's just they were definitely experimenting with their sound, trying to see if they could work in a more mainstream fashion, and I think they did a great job. They definitely know how to write good, catchy songs, and this album is loaded with catchy songs. Also, Bron Daylor getting to do more vocals on this album. So, I love The Hunter, regardless as to what other people think. But before we move on, so the band would once again be touring their asses off, including a very particular tour they did pretty much right after The Hunter came out, and that was a tour with Ghost and Opeth, which, if I wasn't in school and if people would trust me more, I would have loved to have seen that concert live, because Opeth and Mastodon, 2 of my favorites, and Ghost, good band in their own right. But yeah, long tour, and then eventually would finally get back to the studio sometime in 2013, and they would pretty much continue in their experimental phase with more mainstream songwriting ideas, and finally released in 2014, we get Once More Around the Sun. Now, another production change as we get Nick Raskulinecz. Nick Raskulinecz. There we go. Who is a successful rock and metal producer. He's done work for Ghost, Foo Fighters, Alice in Chains, and Trivium. So another fantastic choice for production on here. This album is my number 8. This is my last place album. I don't hate this album. I actually think this is a great album. I think all their albums are great. It's just something had to come last. And honestly, I would say out of all the Mastodon albums, this is the one that I've listened to the least. This is the one I'm the least familiar with. And after re-listening to it the night before recording this video, it's a lot better than I remembered it to being. I mean, I remembered when it came out, thought it was good, but not as good as The Hunter, in my opinion. And this album definitely sounded like a continuation of what they were doing on The Hunter. Maybe the heaviness is tweaked up just a tad, like there's more meat behind the guitars this time around. But I don't know, it's just didn't really go back to this album much when it came out until recently, and yeah, shame on me for not listening to it more. But yeah, there are some really, really good songs on here. Tracks like Tread Lightly, The Motherload, which, very silly music video, but a cool song. High Road, that kind of like almost like a stoner metal track. Chimes at Midnight is a great song. Other ones like Sleep in the Deep, but Diamond in the Witch House, their long song, definitely bringing back that prog influence. Like, there's still a hint of prog in their sound at this point. It's not like they went away from it. They're still a prog band, but definitely experimenting. Kind of like what Rush did in the 80s, like taking the idea of being prog, but do it in the way you wouldn't expect you to be prog. And while Once More Around the Sun is my number 8, it's my last place, it's still a great album. Definitely check it out. I recommend you check out everything Mastodon. What am I kidding? So there you go. But once again, more touring going on for Mastodon going forward, and then they would finally get back to the studio sometime in 2016, still on Reprise Records, and this time they would go back to a producer. They would go back to Brennan O'Brien, who did Crack the Sky, and released in 2017, we get Emperor of Sand. This is my number 5 album. This is the return to the prog Mastodon. Like, definitely things got a little more proggy. There's still moments of their, like, experimental mainstream sound, especially on the song Show Yourself, which almost sounds like a Domo Origato Mr. Roboto Domo kind of song, but it's still catchy and fun. But you do get some very heavy monsters on here. Songs like Sultan's Curse, Steam Breathers, kind of like a good balance between the heavy side and the mainstream side. Other heavy tracks like Roots Remain, Ancient Kingdom, and you even get more guest stars on here. You get Kevin Sharp from Brutal Truth, legendary grindcore death grind band, doing vocals on Scorpion Breath. But the big standout, once again, the finale track, and the long one at 8 minutes almost, Jaguar God. That might be one of the top 10 best Mastodon songs of all time, because holy shit, once again, embracing more of their progressive side and just writing something that felt cohesive, that felt true to what they wanted to do. I mean, this album, top to bottom, like I said, it's a return to their roots a little bit, as it's more proggy. There's a little bit of the sludginess kind of comes back a little bit on some riffs and on some tracks, but still retaining a little bit of their mainstream sensibility from the prior 2 albums. This sounded like a good, even mix of everything Mastodon had to offer, and late in their career. This is a hell of an album. Definitely check it out. Now, once again, big time touring, as this band is always on the road and always working their asses off. However, 2020, when the pandemic hit, kind of halted the band a little bit and kind of laid dormant for a little while. I was remembering, like, before the beginning of last year, I was thinking, I wonder when we will actually get another Mastodon album. But then we hear news that they were in the studio to do a new album, and that it would be their first double album. And also, once again, to continue a theme, new producer, as they would actually tackle, probably, other than Brennan O'Brien, the most high-profile producer that they've had, and they would get David Bottrell. David Bottrell is a big producer in the world of hard rock and metal. He's done stuff for Godsmack, King Crimson, Peter Gabriel, but most notably, Tool. And he's done work for so many other bands, but another excellent choice for producer. And David definitely knows how to bring out heft, atmosphere, and sound out of an album. If you want proof, check out Tool Lateralis and you'll get what I mean. But we get the news, David Bottrell on production, it's a double album, and we finally get that double album, and we get to their last one, which came out October of 2021. We get Hushed and Grim. Now, interesting backstory of this album is that this album was a tribute to their former manager, Nick John, who passed away from cancer in 2018, which was a huge loss to the band because Nick was like one of their best friends and took care of them over the years, and losing him really affected the band. So this album is seen as a tribute to him. But this album is my number 4. I absolutely love this album. This was my number 1 album of the year for 2021. And this is definitely, out of the reviews I've seen, definitely the most divisive album of the list. There are people who just don't like this album, and I don't get it. I really don't get it. Yeah, it's long. It's a double album, and it's like nearly 90 minutes, but every song on here is masterfully crafted, great atmosphere, and just the songwriting chops got better on this album in comparison to Emperor of Sand. There's a little more heaviness on here, but there's a lot more atmosphere on here. Top to bottom, all 15 songs just have something beautiful to offer. Tracks on here like The Crux, Sickle and Peace, which was fun, More Than I Can Chew. Definitely the big thing that I was missing on here was Brent's vocals. Like, this was dominated by Braun and Troy. Brent only had 2 songs, Peace and Tranquility and The Beast. And I wish that was really the only complaint I had, is Brent should have gotten more vocal moments on here. But Troy and Braun do a fantastic job filling in the gaps. But for me, the standouts on here, and if you want to know more about my opinion about Hushed and Grim, go check out my review. But the Cliff Notes, Skeleton of Splendor, Gobblers of Dregs, Had It All, Gigantium, Pushing the Tides, Sickle and Peace, Peace and Tranquility, More Than I Can Chew, those are the standouts. All the songs are great, but those were all my personal favorites, especially Skeleton of Splendor and Had It All. Probably the 2 saddest Mastodon songs ever, and like I said, given their loss they had, this was a fitting tribute to a dear friend of theirs and a man who took care of them for so many years. But yeah, Hushed and Grim, my number 4. And that, ladies and gentlemen, does it for my Mastodon album ranking. Yeah, perfect discography in my opinion. All their albums really good to outstanding. So yeah, definitely a lot of people are going to have this ranked completely different, I understand. And I look forward to seeing my boys over at Thralls do this ranking later in the year. So that's going to be interesting to see. But what is your favorite Mastodon album? How would you rank their discography? Let me know in the comments section below. But before I go, as you see in the title, huge announcement. And, well, only very few people know about this, but I figured this would be a good time to let you in on a little cool thing that's going to be happening next week. What's happening next week is, well, Horseman Podcast is coming back for their 70th episode, but it's going to be a special pre-recorded episode as I, and hopefully Ricky and maybe some others, are going to get to interview one of my metal idols, one of my musical idols, the one, the only, Dan Swano. I can't wait for this. It's going to be an exciting interview. I can't help but be a little bit nervous because this is the biggest guest that we have had on the show thus far, and an absolute legend, and I can't wait to get to pick his brain and find out all about his secrets with Edge of Sanity and then his time in Bloodbath and what he's doing currently. But if you guys want in on the action, go to the community tab on my YouTube page and you'll see a post asking from you guys questions, because we will be doing a fan question segment. So if you have one question, just one question you want to ask Dan Swano, leave them in the comments of that post, and I will try my best to get it answered for you. But as far as the next batch of bands that are in the running for a discography ranking, there is currently a poll on the YouTube community page. Go there and you'll find out who is going to be getting ranked next. But anyways, thank you guys for watching this video. Horns high, and I will see you soon. Ladies and gentlemen, introducing ShitTech's brand new ShitCan. This revolutionary on-the-go product will be the biggest savior of your life. Say you're at a hotel that doesn't have any toilets, or you're stranded out in the middle of nowhere as your car breaks down, you can take the ShitTech ShitCan with you if you need to take a dump, piss, or puke whenever you need to.
Yep, you can never go wrong with GIF media files.
You are aware it's pronounced GIF, right?
Oh no, silly, this is a GIF.
Damn it, we don't even have spam in here! Why?